This Bible is God's inspired word. God has promised that He would preserve His word, and that heaven and earth would pass away, but not His word. Part of God's plan in preserving His word has been its translation into thousands of languages. The story of how God worked in the lives of many men over 4 centuries ago to give us the authorized 1611 translation of the Scriptures, also known as the King James Bible, is worth knowing and repeating. But God was also working to provide the Spanish-speaking world with His Word. What many English-speaking people are not aware of is that He did it at the same time, and in many instances in the very same places as the translation of the English Bible. We invite you to travel with us to the very places where the man who translated the Bible into Spanish worked, studied, and suffered, so that the Spanish-speaking world would have a copy of God's Word in their tongue. In 1516, a man by the name of Erasmus worked in that building behind me in the city of Cambridge to publish the grand edition of the New Testament in Greek, later known as Textus Receptus. Textus Receptus has been the backbone for the great translations of the Holy Scriptures. This is the town of Montemolín, near the village of Reina in Spain. Around the year 1520, a man was born in this region who would influence the Spanish-speaking world for generations to come, especially the Christian community. The man's name was Casiodoro, also known as Casiodoro de Reina. Casiodoro translated the first Bible directly from the original languages, the Hebrew and the Greek, into the Spanish language. The first historical record of Casiodoro is found when he enters the monastery of San Isidoro as a Jeromite monk. The year 1557. The place, the monastery of San Isidoro del Campo, outside the great city of Seville in Spain. This little town is called Santiponce now, but it was built upon the old Roman city of Italica, whose ruins, and especially a beautiful amphitheater, can still be seen in this place today. For many years prior to 1557, the spirit of the Reform had prevailed among the inhabitants of this monastery. The works of Luther, Erasmus, Zwingli, Calvin, and others had greatly influenced their thinking, led by their head friar, a man by the name of Garcia Arias. It's also very possible that a copy of the New Testament published by Erasmus belonged in this monastery. This may have influenced Casiodoro's decision to translate the Scriptures into the Spanish language. For you see, in 1551, the Spanish Inquisition had strictly prohibited the reading and the possession of any other Bible except the Latin Bible. Any Bible translated into any common language was strictly prohibited by the Spanish Inquisition. This is the Plaza de San Francisco in Seville. It is the spot where the Inquisition would punish those whom they label as heretics. Many of our brethren suffered great punishment and torture, and also death in this same spot. Punishment could be dealt out in so many different ways. and the idea was to extract forced confessions from them through flogging, torture, the gallows, and even being burned at the stake. For those who were fortunate enough to be able to escape the long arm of the Inquisition, their images would be burned in effigy in this place to send a clear warning that no matter where they were in the European continent, that if they were to be captured by the agents of the Inquisition, they could be brought back to this plaza and be burned at the stake. During the summer of 1557, the brethren at the monastery of San Isidoro del Campo had some serious decisions to make. First of all, they had to define their theological position. If they continued to read, study, and interpret scriptures from an exegetical rather than a dogmatic point of view, sooner or later they would incur the wrath of the Inquisition. But if they tried to escape in mass, it was inevitable that some of them would be captured and suffer martyrdom. But something happened during that summer of 1557 that greatly influenced their decision. A man by the name of Julianillo Hernandez, whose ministry had been to distribute the works of the great Christian writers of the time to Spanish Christians in the Seville area, made a tragic mistake. Unbeknownst to him, two people with the same name lived in the area, and he delivered a very sensitive book to the wrong person. That person notified the authorities, and immediately the Inquisition launched an investigation. When the brethren at the monastery learned of that investigation, they immediately decided to leave. Of the 44 inhabitants of the monastery, 22 of them decided to leave. Among them, the friar, the vicar, the procurator, and 9 other monks. Among their number, Casiodoro de Reina, Cipriano de Valera, Antonio del Corro, and other men of God. 22 people in all tried to make their way to freedom in Geneva. Most of them made it to Geneva. However, some of them were captured by the Inquisition and brought back to Seville, to the castle of St. George, the Inquisitional headquarters in this area. They were judged there, tortured there, and then taken to the Plaza de San Francisco, where they were burned at the stake, including Julianillo Hernandez. After fleeing the monastery at San Isidoro in Spain, Casiodoro de Reina, Cipriano, and the other brethren from the monastery started a long journey that culminated here in Geneva, in Switzerland. Geneva is a very interesting city. It had been one of those cities that had been sympathetic to the ideas of the Reform. John Calvin, one of the great reformers, had started the Reform movement here in Geneva. Now it is worthy of mention that Calvin had been a tremendous influence in the life of Casiodoro de Reina and Cipriano de Valera, which motivated their coming directly to Geneva after fleeing the monastery at San Isidoro in Spain. A congregation of Spanish refugees had been meeting here for a few years, and as soon as Casiodoro, Cipriano, and the other brethren arrived in Geneva, they immediately joined with them. Geneva has changed much since those days. However, we know that through these streets, Casiodoro and their brethren walked many times doing the Lord's work. Behind me is a monument that the citizens of Geneva dedicated to the champions of the Reform movement here in Switzerland, to Farel, Calvin, Beza, and Knox. Certainly, Casiodoro de Reina and Cipriano de Valera were in very good company. However, differences arose, and Casiodoro thought it best to move to England, taking with him part of the Spanish congregation. Queen Elizabeth had ascended to the throne of England, and the environment of religious freedom was prevalent in London at that time. Also, the possibilities for the translation of the Spanish Bible was more favorable in England than anywhere else in Europe. Cipriano de Valera remained here in Geneva for at least 2 years after Casiodoro and part of the Spanish congregation left for London. Casiodoro and his small group of exiles arrived in London in 1559 and formed the Spanish congregation. He drafted a confession of faith and requested formal recognition as a church. The confession of faith created a scandal because it rejected infant baptism, among other things. A church charter was granted, and they began to meet at St. Mary Axe in central London. Cipriano de Valera followed Casiodoro to London and became involved in the translation of the Bible into Spanish. The Spanish Inquisition was making every effort to discredit or entrap any and all of the Spanish exiles. They paid a spy to falsely accuse Casiodoro of adultery and sodomy. Casiodoro felt that it was in his best interest to leave London after the accusations were made. On the 21st of September, 1563, Casiodoro de Reina fled the city of London and came directly here to the city of Antwerp in what is now Belgium. A few days later, his wife also fled London, disguised as a sailor, and came to join her husband here. From this place, both of them started their journey to Frankfurt. From Antwerp, Casiodoro came directly here to Frankfurt in Germany. His main purpose for coming here was to concentrate in the translation of the Bible into the Spanish language. Also, upon arrival, he made contact with the Spanish congregation, which had met here for many years. This was a time of extensive travel for Casiodoro. He traveled from Frankfurt to Strasbourg to Basel, not only involved in the translation of the Spanish Bible, but also because he and his wife operated a business dealing in silk. It was a happy time for his family as well. His firstborn son, Marcus, was born here in the city of Frankfurt. Finally, after more than 10 long years, the end of the road as far as the translation of the Spanish Bible is concerned. Casiodoro de Reina brought all his manuscripts here to the city of Basel in Switzerland. In that house marked by that angel, Casiodoro was able to finish the translation of the Bible. He arrived gravely ill. So ill, in fact, that he spent more than 5 weeks in bed. Nevertheless, he was able to finish the translation of the Scriptures and also begin the proofreading and the supervision of the printing of the same. In the printing establishment of a man by the name of Johann Herbst, better known as Operinus, the Bible began to be printed in March 1568. Unfortunately, Operinus died halfway through the project. But the man who took over the business, a man by the name of Thomas Guerin, with the help of another printer by the name of Apiarius, was able to finish the project in August 1569. The Bible that Casiodoro translated and produced is known as the Bear Bible because of the engraving on its cover. It is the picture of a bear trying to reach a honeycomb. Much has been written about that particular cover, some maintaining that it is the printer's trademark, others that it is a reference to the book of the Psalms as it pertains to the Word of God being sweet as honey to the mouth. Whatever the correct explanation may be, Casiodoro's Bible remains to this day a great triumph, a great literary achievement as far as Spanish literature is concerned. It ranks among some of the best accomplishments in world literature. Most important is the impact upon the lives of millions of Spanish-speaking people around the world as it affects their moral, their social, and their spiritual lives. In 1578, Casiodoro de Reina received an invitation from the brethren of the French Lutheran Church here in Antwerp to become their pastor. However, the charges in England were very much pending, and Casiodoro decided to take care of that problem once and for all. Casiodoro de Reina returned to London in 1578 to face the charges made against him 15 years earlier. He was summoned here to Lambeth Palace by Edmund Grindal, Archbishop of Canterbury, and having no evidence at all to incriminate him, he was absolved completely of all charges. Casiodoro came back to Antwerp and began pastoring. These were happy years for Casiodoro de Reina. His long-time wish had been to pastor a church, and he felt that God had finally blessed him with that wish. However, the threat of Spanish invasion of this region was always a fear, and indeed it occurred in the year 1585. In 1585, Casiodoro de Reina played the role of Moses in that he took the French-speaking congregation that he pastored in Antwerp and moved them here to this location in Frankfurt. Now, this is the site of the old Church of the White Ladies, where the Spanish congregation had met for so many years. Here, for the following 9 years, he served as their pastor, counselor, and spiritual leader. Unfortunately, the building was destroyed during the bombing raids during the Second World War. Casiodoro de Reina died on the 15th of March, 1594. He was buried 2 days later, but his burial site remains a mystery to this day. There is another man to whom we have not given due recognition, but who is nonetheless one of the key figures in the story of the translation of the Bible into the Spanish language. His name was Cipriano. Cipriano was born in the city of Badajoz, in the old province of Valera in Spain. He, along with the other monks from the monastery of San Isidoro del Campo, fled to Geneva, and along with Casiodoro and some of the others, made their way to London. In London, he helped Cipriano with the translation of the Bible. But in 1559, he came directly here to the city of Cambridge, where he immediately enrolled at Magdalen College. In 1560, he received a direct recommendation from Queen Elizabeth to be admitted as part of the association at Magdalen College. And in 1563, he received his Masters of Arts from this prestigious institution. After his achievements in Cambridge, Cipriano de Valera came to Oxford, where he was incorporated as a professor at Magdalen College in the year 1565. For the next 35 years, Cipriano de Valera would serve not only as a teacher here at Magdalen College, but also served as a private tutor to many notable students. It was also during this time that Cipriano de Valera began the revision of the Spanish translation of the scriptures made by Casiodoro de Reina. While teaching at Oxford, Cipriano de Valera established his residency here in London, in this area known as Broad Street Ward. Also, it was during his stay here that he continued his revision of Casiodoro de Reina's Bible, and he published the New Testament in the year 1596. When Cipriano de Valera finished his revision of the entire Reina Bible, he was unable to find a printer in London who could handle such a large project. Therefore, he came here to Amsterdam, where the project was published in 1602. There are no more historical records of his life after this point. It is presumed that he died shortly after, and his burial site, as Casiodoro's, is unknown to this day. Just as with the King James Bible, there have been several revisions of the Reina Valera Spanish Bible since its original publication in 1569. By God's providence, many of these revisions, such as the 1909 and the 1960, have remained true to the original Textus Receptus Greek and Masoretic Hebrew scriptures. This is confirmed when the revisions are compared to the Greek and Hebrew and not to any other translations. Unfortunately, the Spanish-speaking world has had to suffer with many recent translations that use the critical texts. Just as in English, these new translations alter and in many cases omit essential words and complete passages from the Holy Scriptures. Most of these modern translations are used and promoted by sects such as the Jehovah's Witnesses and even the Catholic Church, who so persecuted Reina and Valera. Some of these modern translations even try to disguise themselves with the title of Reina Valera Actualized. However, most Spanish Christians still love and adhere to the reliable Spanish translation in the 1909 and 1960 versions of the Reina Valera that has brought millions of Hispanics to the feet of Christ in the 20th century alone. The Reina Valera Bible is God's eternal treasure for the Spanish-speaking world.